Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And last week's round of tuning has come in, and it's now Friday, and I wanted to do a data analysis. We're going to break down which specializations are on the climb. You can see some of them on the screen right now when it comes to melee DPS, and which specializations are starting to disappear into the ether given these changes. And there are likely going to be more changes announced tonight and maybe even more follow-up on Monday depending on the feedback that they get from the community, because we've seen that they are actually responsive to feedback last time around. So if you want to make sure you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then it's a great idea to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. But for week number 2, Ret Paladins, you have once again reclaimed the throne in the #1 melee position over Assassination Rogues. Retribution Paladin is doing remarkable overall damage right now. Great support for the team still. Just well-rounded, simple, easy to execute, and gives great results. I don't know when this is going to stop. It's like you guys dominate in the solo brackets, but then when it comes to rated 3v3, I don't know if we're going to see you at BlizzCon or not, even despite how dominant you are in the solo brackets. But it's definitely a specialization that I tend to recommend to anybody who comes into my stream and they're like, what should I play as a melee DPS player first time in PvP? It's like 9 times out of 10, I'm recommending Ret Paladin just because it's much more forgiving. You have a bunch of immunities. You have a lot of crowd control avoidance to deal with situations that might be more frustrating. And you can win pretty much all matchups. I've not really seen Retribution Paladins having any significant downside. So what this has made me realize is that if you want your specialization to be good, we got to be louder on Twitter, and we got to be like threatening to close down our Discords or something to get buffs. Like I've realized that that's what we got to do. So like you guys down here at the bottom, like you guys aren't loud enough on Twitter. You got to get more likes on your posts. We got to stir the pot more, because like this is huge. Look at this swing from the bottom to the top with Retribution Paladin. Assassination Rogue, the nerfs didn't really do too much. It was just a flesh wound. For you guys moving into week 2, I think you are still the dominant rogue spec. Burst damage during Kingsbane is still much higher than a lot of other classes are able to achieve as far as burst damage is concerned. But it did obviously even out a bit with Retribution Paladin when it comes to solo content. Arms Warrior still holding in a great position here, I think, in terms of damage and utility. It's an S tier specialization, but it can have some very challenging lobbies against multiple range DPS where you get kited and kind of get blasted down, and it can be difficult in that environment. But even despite those difficulties and those counter lobbies, it's still incredibly popular, and it's obviously still viable despite what changes came through for it. And Windwalker, the spec that received probably some of the most significant nerfs, is still holding #4 position, and I actually think it's very strong at the moment. It's well-rounded, and obviously specs are going to be getting their 4-set bonuses, so it didn't really feel, it kind of walked off the nerfs that they implemented onto it for this week. So Windwalker is still a really solid specialization. What's surprising to me is that Unholy is still holding so healthily here in the middle, and Frost is just completely in despair, because Frost DK is actually a lot better now. Frost DK has some of the highest bursts. It might even be higher than Assassination Rogue right now. So I do think Frost DK, this is like a seed waiting to grow. Maybe, I don't know if people aren't selecting it because they're watching older tier lists that are saying that it was like C tier before it got buffed, because Frost DK does a lot more damage than Unholy. But Unholy is just kind of like riding through the mid ranks at the moment, where I don't think there's anything particularly impressive about it, but maybe not totally abysmal either. And maybe that's bad, because it might mean that you're not actually going to get any attention. So you might just kind of ride out being mid for week number 2 here. Havoc Demon Hunter, a spec that also got hammered with some major defensive nerfs, is still holding strong in the middle of the pack. I think a lot of players have adapted their builds now to take up Fell Lance as a PvP talent. It just does a huge amount of damage. It does like over 100,000 a pop, so you fly up in the air and you're just blasting Fell Lances down from the sky. That seems to be an adaptation that I've noticed most significantly for Havoc. And it's still quite durable, even despite the blur changes, and obviously in uncoordinated environments, you're still going to feel durable. I think the changes to the blur are mostly going to be felt at the top level in 3v3 as opposed to the solo PvP content uncoordinated environment there. So Havoc is still doing phenomenal. Fury is starting to kind of climb up, and honestly is not represented as well as powerful represented as well for as powerful as it is, because Fury Warrior is actually very strong right now. It's actually one of the melee that I love logging on. It just feels good. You're just doing damage all the time. It's kind of similar to BM Hunter, where it just feels like you have your cooldowns up all the time also, but that's the main reason its sustain engine is so good. I have a lot of fun with it. Enhancement Shaman is trailing a bit behind. I think it's just too easily countered by disarms at the moment. It still does feel dependent on its cooldown windows, and the damage outside of its cooldown windows, and even inside of its cooldown windows doesn't feel like overwhelming. I feel like it could honestly use like an aura buff, like another flat damage increase this week around. Hopefully you guys will get it. We'll have to see. Again, much like Unholy, it's like one of those things where it's like, it's not terrible, but it's not amazing like some of these other top specs. Like maybe you get nothing. We'll have to see. Survival Hunter saw significant changes as well. They cut out all your burst damage and brought up some of your sustain, and I actually think they achieved a very decent position for it as far as that type of adjustment. Hopefully they're gonna be able to achieve that a little bit better with Assassination Rogue and Fire Mage when we get to it in the future, because I think those are still some significant outliers there. But Survival actually feels pretty good for what it is. Obviously, I think main Survival Hunter players miss what it was last expansion. It might not be as big of fans of the total rework, but for what it is right now, I definitely think it's increasingly becoming more competitive. Feral Druid got some bleed buffs, so we don't see it spiking too much. And again, I think that's because for how complex it is and how difficult it is to get results, it's got to be like clearly better than other options, right? Because you have to try so much harder to win. So if you're not able to clearly have any sort of edge there, it kind of trails behind. Sadly, I don't think the hero tree rebalance shifted any Feral Druids out of Wildstalker either. I think that was just not enough of a buff towards the Druids of the Claw to get any Feral Druids to shift over. But Feral Druid still has a really good baseline kit. So it's one of those specs where it's like, if its damage does start to creep up, it's gonna be a very dominant force. Salty Rogue is still trailing at the bottom. I think it's just all of the rogues have gone Assassination, and I mean maybe that's partly because Assassination was like not good last patch and was kind of frustrating to play, and now it's really good and it's fun to play. So all the rogues are taking a sabbatical. I don't know if this representation of Rogue is indicative of necessarily them being weak at the current moment in time, because I actually think Salty Rogue is still decent. Obviously does struggle in solo environments with other players putting your stuns on DR, and you are still very dependent on stuns in order to effectively connect your damage. And because mages are so good, obviously, and they're immune to stuns, that's going to be a difficult situation for you to adapt to in the meta. Subtlety Rogue, I would say, is definitely a lot better off than something like Outlaw Rogue, at least still, with the changes that they implemented moving into this week. And then I touched on it a bit with Frosty K. It's just Frosty K is actually very good right now. I think once the news breaks out and people see that, like, it does more burst damage, I think, than Season 1. Reaper's Mark is hitting huge numbers right now, like upwards of 200,000. I actually think it's really strong, and if it is a melee centric meta, Frosty K can get a lot of cleaves damage and stack targets up there. So it's really defense. Maybe that's honestly the only thing holding it back. It's a bit shaky against warriors, especially, and maybe windwalkers. I would say defense is maybe its weakness there. Maybe you get a little defense buff this week. We'll have to see when those changes come through, and obviously I'll relay those to you guys as soon as they happen. And then Outlaw Rogue did get buffed. I've seen a couple of them that are more geared than me because I played it myself, but I don't have the set bonuses. I'm behind on gear. I don't have a lot of the epic pieces. Still felt a little bit like a tickle monster, but then when I played with an Outlaw Rogue that was fully geared with a 2-set bonus, they were keeping up with Windwalker damage. So Outlaw Rogue is much like Feral Druid, where if you're not at the top level, getting performance out of it is going to be next to impossible. But if you do achieve that top level of performance, it seems like it is competitive with some of the specs that are up in this range. So Outlaw Rogue is one of those specs where I have serious concerns that they are going to end up giga buffing it because they're seeing no movement in it, and it's just going to completely destroy the meta. So just keep your eyes on it, right? Because I feel like it is falling into that type of trend. Now, when we look at range DPS, as far as movement here, we didn't see any changes to BM Hunter, and we don't see any on the graph either. It's still just completely dominant, much like Ret Paladin. It's just so easy to get results from, and it does so much overwhelming, easy to do damage. And having Scatter Shot now as an instant CC that doesn't require aiming, it's just getting crazy performance. Fire Mage did receive like a last second nerf towards its ignite damage, but it's still very dominant, even with the Pyroclasm nerf and that ignite application. It's just very durable with the double barrier, is what I've noticed. And Pyroclasm is still able to significantly move a health bar, which is a bit more challenging to do on a lot of other ranged DPS specializations. I'm curious to see what they do with it. Because I think with Mage, their death rates are very high, although Destrolock has actually taken the #1 death rate position. So maybe Destro buffs will come in as far as defense, and I don't know if that analytic is what they're using to dictate whether Fire Mage should be nerfed or not when it comes to defense, because so much has been working against Mage into this patch, and it's still so good, and it has to be the defense, right? Because it's the only thing that they haven't touched, and I think the reason that they haven't touched it significantly is that newer mages have trouble surviving, which I think requires a bit more of a redesign where defense is more passive, so that new mages aren't just exploding on site, but pro mages aren't able to live forever. But we'll see what happens with Fire Mage. If they're this is going to be the real test for them this week, if they bring the sledgehammer down on you or not, or if they're going to do anything to BM Hunter, because I was surprised they nerfed Windwalker but not BM Hunter. We'll have to see if they bring the sledgehammer down or not, or if we're just going to have another Mage Hunter season. Affliction Warlock is still riding pretty decently here. The agony buffs were nice. They weren't nothing. I think they ended up in being like a 3 to 4% overall damage buff, with the 50% damage increase to agony. And you got a little bit of extra pet damage, mind you. I haven't seen that have too much implication, at least as affliction. But you're just riding good. It's can be challenging though. There's a lot of melee DPS, a lot of interrupts to deal with. Has been my frustration with it. And still seems like some healers are just spam dispelling dots sometimes. But obviously a very healthy margin when it comes to solo PvP. Rated 3v3 again, a different beast entirely. I kind of think that maybe they need to make the dampening pace the same in 3v3 so that the balance ends up being the same. Because if you're balancing around shuffle, which is the more popular bracket, it makes sense to balance around it. Then 3v3 with slower dampening is obviously not going to be balanced. So if they had the same dampening pace, they effectively become the same level of balance. So I do actually think they should maybe consider that. I think it would go a long way as far as evening out viability of specs amongst different brackets, and obviously help out like tournament gameplay, tournament meta viability as well. But Affliction is still doing decently. I don't really think they're going to do anything to it this week, though, if I had to guess. Marksmanship Hunter did get some nerfs, but some buffs as well. I think that the rapid fire buff is definitely noticeable. You are starting to crank mages. And again, Marksman coming up, Shadow Priest potentially coming up, Ellie Shaman coming up. These are specs usually that are challenging for mages. If there was anything, it would be Hunters again that could potentially rise against them. Marksman feels, I think, a bit better this week. Still struggles much like Enhance with disarms, and there's a lot of disarms obviously with the viability of Rogue and Warrior and Windwalker, like we saw in the other chart, which is I think a reason that it's being held down relative to Beast Mastery Hunter. Boomkin doing solidly here, towards the top 5 this season. Its damage output is great. Main weakness is defense and knowing how to navigate surviving multiple melee chasing you at the beginner level. But once you've mastered that, which I have a guide on how to do that, I'll have it linked at the end of this video. You can definitely control the pace of the game. I've been enjoying my Boomkin. I think it's solid. For me, it's like your main burst ability, like Star Surge, for example, or Earthshock or Lava Burst or something like that, is that it needs to hit around 80,000 to 120,000 damage in order to feel effective on the current health pools. And that's where Boomkin fits right now. Its burst abilities can hit that threshold, and it feels really good. That's an important threshold. Shadow Priest is another spec where it's like it doesn't hit that threshold on any ability, despite the buffs that they applied to try and make them more bursty and more lethal. They applied like a 20% to 15% buff on a lot of their burst abilities, but those abilities weren't hitting very hard. So it added like maybe 3,000 to 5,000 damage on each of them, and they're still hitting less than 50,000 damage total, which is not meeting that threshold. So for me, Shadow Priest is kind of like Demonology. They need to trim some of their pad damage from apparitions and add that into their core abilities, like their Mind Blast and their Death, and they might need to significantly add it because those abilities are hitting for like 20,000 damage. They might need to be like literally quadrupled in the amount of damage that they do. And I think Shadow Priest players would enjoy their class more. Like, does it look viable on paper? Yes. Does it work in deep dampening? Yes. But is it an enjoyable experience? We're able to move health bars? I would say no. So I think that creating a better experience for Shadow Priest players would be to go after some of those passive abilities that are obviously pushing the damage meter up for them, nerfing those and bringing up their core abilities, so when they're pressing buttons, it's like, oh, it's me moving the health bar. I feel like I'm doing something. I think that's an important note for Shadow Priest that will make them more viable in the current game state and likely more competitive across the whole game. Elemental Shaman, the Lava Burst buffs, the Farseer is starting to feel decent, I think, especially as we get the set bonus. Still a bit worried about Stormbringer. Lightning Bolt is just pathetically weak. Now Stormkeeper only gives you 2 instant Lightning Bolts. It feels much worse than getting 3 instant Lightning Bolts. I kind of wish Lightning Bolt would get another buff. Maybe not Tempest, but Lightning Bolt, just a bit of a buff. Like, I've seen Lightning Bolts that are hitting like 20,000 damage. It just feels weird for a 1.5 second cast. But I don't know if they're going to be happy with where it is or not. Time will tell, right? Devastation Evoker is finally starting to climb a bit. People are finally acknowledging that this is good, and 69 players, nice. It does really good overall damage. Devastation Evoker is one of those specs where I feel like they kind of hit the mark. There's a lot of specs where I think they hit the mark. It does decent damage without completely one-shotting people, and Devastation is one of those, and we see that here on the chart. Destruction Warlock is still holding very healthy. It did get some buffs. I think in the hands of the best players, you can definitely make it work. With long casted spells, though, the threshold of damage for me is like it's got to hit like 200,000 damage. Like, for example, with Pyroclasm, it hits around 200,000 damage, and that feels right for how long of a cast speed and how much of an investment it is. And Chaos Bolt, like, maybe with a little more gear, because maybe I'm under geared. I don't think I'm under geared on my lock anymore, but it feels like it hits like around 170. So it's just a little bit too low on the threshold for it. So buffing it to bring it up to that 200,000 threshold, I think, is where destruction will feel a bit more competitive. And honestly, use a defense buff. I maybe they should lean a little out of the dark pack nerf that they did recently, or maybe up its armor, up its its physical damage reduction a tiny bit, because that's the main weakness is its defense. It doesn't feel like it can be stationary, and it has to be stationary in order to actually cast right now. Arcane Mage still starting to climb. When I first played it, I was playing a last season build that was terrible, and I was very frustrated and hated it. Then I updated my build, and I was like, okay, this is actually pretty fun. And with the build that I updated it to, made it easier to fake interrupts because I could cancel my missiles, because my missiles generate charges as opposed to spending them. And they spend them, that feels really bad in PvP, because if you cancel your cast, you lose all your orbs. Whereas when you're building them, you can cancel it. It's not the end of the world. And I actually thought it was pretty fun, decently slippery, especially fun in Battlegrounds. Obviously, it's a bit more challenging than Fire Mage because it's only one school of magic. So if you do get shut down on it, you're completely shut down and unable to do too much. Devourer is falling off heavily from season 1 to season 2, as we see on this chart, and I kind of think it's a bit unjustified. I think Devourer, it's like one of those things where maybe there's like a knee-jerk reaction where everybody's like, oh god, this got nerfed a lot, we got to get off of it. I don't think it's viable anymore, because I actually think it's not as bad, at least when it comes to solo PvP. Maybe obviously, rated 33, Rogue Mage is just the plague, bro. It's just the plague. It's obviously gonna have a harder time, but in the solo brackets, I actually think it's still doing respectably well, even despite the sweeping nerfs that have hit it. And then Frost Mage, this is a weird spot to see you. Where's Og? Og isn't even on here, dude. Og got a buff. It's not even on here. People have been telling me that Og is better. Like, I don't think so, bro. It's not even on the chart anymore. Frost Mage is actually near the bottom. I'm going to play Frost today. I'm going to play it today. I really don't think it needs changes. I think it's much like with Rogue. Everybody's just gone over to Fire because it's the new hot thing. But maybe it is struggling. I feel like, I don't know if I'm biased now from Frost Mage domination last season, and I'm sitting here like, no, it deserves to be here because of how oppressive it was before, or if it's legitimately needs help, or if I'm trying to delineate those feelings and emotions and biases out of my assessment for here, because I think that it's still good, but it's crazy to me that it's actually lower than Arcane. Maybe it's because Arcane can hit 500,000 crits. I've actually hit a 500,000 crit recently, so maybe that's it. I think it's also people just want to break from it. It's been the same for a while, and Fire is just really cool and new, obviously, with the Pyroclasm build. And the Demonology, even though it's at the bottom, I think it is doing better. I actually think that its performance went up more than Shadow did with the changes that they applied to it, because Demon Bolt now hits in that 80,000 damage threshold I was talking about, the 80,000, 100,000 damage threshold. You're able to achieve that now on Demonology, and obviously received the most buffs with pet damage of all the Warlocks. I think Demonology will start to climb a bit from this point. It's just Affliction is just really good, especially in Shuffle right now, and you don't have to deal with the pet management, the pet AI, which is still annoying. I think Tyrant could honestly get like a little bit of a buff. The Tyrant itself doesn't do hardly any damage, and it's really annoying when it bugs out and kind of runs around the pillar not doing anything. Those are the main pain points, I think, for Demonology at the moment. But I do expect this guy to start to climb up a bit. And then finally we got the healers. I'm very curious to see how this worked out. So it looks like we still have Holy Priest completely dominant here in the number 1 position, even despite the nerfs, even despite the outcry and everybody thinking that it was going to be over. You still represent 44% of all of the players between 1900 to 2770. People are 2770 already on Holy Priest. And obviously, some of these are lingering players probably from week 1. So it'll probably go down a bit, but obviously it's not completely unviable. And the healer balance across these guys seems really good. Resto Shaman, Holy Pally, Resto Druid, Disc Priest, as far as Solo Shuffle, seems really good. Prez and Mistweaver are lagging a bit behind, though. I think it might be mana constraints, because a lot of games are going really deep dampening, like 80%, 90%. So there's potential mana issues, I think, for these guys at the bottom. At the moment for them. A Holy Paladin, I'm surprised it's so high, because I honestly think it's not that strong, but it is actually holding in a decent spot, even despite my own personal opinions of it, or my own personal experiences with seeing the Holy Paladins here. But the fact that you're so high, you might honestly get nerfed again. I do anticipate a Mistweaver buff this week because it's struggling in PvE and it's struggling in PvP. So if they buff any of the like casted healing for PvE, which is the main thing that's struggling there, it's in both, they'll probably let some of that come through for PvP, and they probably should as well. I do wonder if they will let more of the pres buffs come through, because last week they did pres buffs, but they only let like a small amount of them through, not a huge amount of them. And obviously Disc Priest is doing a bit better. It's still, maybe you're not too happy because you've traded places with Holy Priest in that number 1 spot when it comes to shuffle, but doing a little bit better obviously with the changes that came through for it. Resto Druid seems to be fine even despite not getting the buffs that came in for it, and Resto Shaman, even despite getting nerfed, still in a really good spot when it comes to the solo PvP brackets for the healers. So overall, I think week 1, good direction. A lot of specs landed in exactly the spot where I think they were trying to achieve, but some of them I think still need some help and still need more tune-ups from their current position in order to satisfy the player base of those given specializations. So hopefully that will be the case here, and that once again I'll relay those to you as they come in. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.